Tonight we have 5 stories, from a story of an old building with a haunting secret, night lurkers, a strange apartment, and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. The author of story 1 has recently released a book. If you enjoy a story and want something to enjoy during these times, you can find a link to that in the description. It is on both Amazon and Barnes & Noble, so definitely check it out. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. In a small town, small as in barely over 1,000 people living there, a new building is something that rarely, if ever, gets built. More than likely, if a new business is started or coming to the town, they'll buy an abandoned building and renovate it instead of having to purchase land and build from the literal ground up. The residents of the town usually are perfectly happy with that because it helps keep their town small and secluded, and it helps local building contractors like my father keep in business. So, when a rich couple that moved from the city settled in our town and wanted to open a new restaurant last summer, they opted to convert an old pier storehouse that sat upon the river which flows through our town, and to show solidarity with our town and support local businesses, they hired my father's company to oversee the construction. My father's construction business wasn't very large at all. It was just him, me, Steve, and Walter. We're all sort of jack-of-all-trades kind of guys. However, there are a couple of guys in town that are very skilled in specific trades that were always willing to help my father at the drop of a hat if need be. With a crew like this, and a very customer-friendly atmosphere, combined with an incredible work ethic and high standards, mostly everyone in the whole county called my father's business when they needed work to be done, and the newcomers were no exception. Apparently, they'd done their research before they even moved from the city. The pier storehouse we were tasked into converting to a restaurant had a bit of history in the town. At one point in history, money flowed like water through the place due to its location on the river. Then one day, way too far back in history that anyone living knows the real reason, the whole pier was abandoned. Boats no longer stopped there, and some sort of dark aura seemed to emanate from the place. The town suffered immensely from the loss of income. Be that we are hardy people and survived. We turned the place into the sleepy little town that it is today, and has been for probably over 150 years. Today, the townsfolk still avoid the pier, but not because of a shady past or bad feeling coming from the place. The whole thing is ancient, and no repairs have been done in a long, long time. It's an unsafe place to be. Even putting a single foot on the rotting wood would have you falling through. Kids sometimes go to it at night to drink and smoke pot. I know I did. But sometimes the place was devoid of human activity or life. Even fishermen preferred to cast their rods from the riverbank rather than take a step onto the pier. The couple had really deep pockets, however, and the money that was offered to my father's business was too much to turn down. So, on the first day of June, in the pale light of early morning, I went with my father to survey the pier to see what exactly we needed to do. The place was large, stretching around 50 feet from the shoreline and about 400 feet long, with the storehouse smack dab in the middle of it all. Our employers didn't want us to replace the entire pier or anything that large in scale, just repair and update the storehouse and enough of the pier so the people could walk to and from the soon-to-be restaurant without fear of falling through rotting wooden planks. We still had our work cut out for us, but it wasn't going to be an impossible task. Clicking on our headlamps, my father told me he wanted me to check out the storehouse, while he checked the pier itself, both the top and bottom. I had no desire to climb underneath the old structure and wait around in the water, so I happily agreed. Grabbing a notebook, pencil, multi-tool, respirator, and measuring tape, I made my way cautiously over to the storehouse. While I had been up to the storehouse before when I was a teenager, looking for a hidden spot to smoke a joint, I did weigh a bit more than I did at 14, and each creak of the wood below my feet caused me to wince in anticipation of me crushing through into the water 15 feet below. However, I made it up to the storehouse without incident, and while I was relieved, I didn't drop my guard for an instant. As I said earlier, I'd been up to the storehouse before, but it was always at night, and I was always just used to it as a view obscure while I smoked a joint or drank some beer. This was the first time I got to actually look over the structure, and I had to admit that whoever built it was a very skilled carpenter. Even with age, its location near the water, and the many times it had to deal with harsh weather throughout the years, it stood proud and intact. Sure, whatever paint had been on it had eroded before I was even born, and the sign above the doorway had been eroded so much that any writing on it had disappeared. But what could you expect? A wooden building that was 100 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 15 feet tall, that was over 100 years old, still standing and having no structural issues was impressive. There was one thing that puzzled me, however. There were two entrances into the storehouse, one facing the shore and one facing the river. With modern building codes, we would have to build in at least 2 more exits. But that wasn't the strange thing. Each doorway had a chain that crossed it multiple times. The chains were attached to stakes driven into the wood beside the doorway, leaving no way to dislodge the chains except by removing the stakes from the wood. Looking closer at the chains, I noticed another odd aspect of them. I was expecting rusted iron chains, but the metal was blackened instead. Not what normal rusted iron looks like. Thinking it over for a moment, I realized that the chains weren't rusted, but tarnished. These chains were made of silver. I called my father over, who had been slowly looking over the planks on top of the pier to measure out how much we needed to replace. He made his way over, and I showed him the chains on the door facing the shore. My father looked over the silver links and whistled. "Quite a find you got yourself there. We can bring them back to the shop, melt them down, and we'll make ourselves a pretty penny before the first payment gets to the bank account." He patted my shoulder and smiled. I doubt the Millers have seen this place in person yet, much less know there's precious metal just hanging around for the taking. Now, I wasn't a superstitious man, and neither was anyone in my family, nor anyone I knew, but a little warning flag was going off in my head. Why do you think these chains are made of silver? Wouldn't regular iron chains be stronger and way less expensive? The smile vanished from my father's face as he thought for a moment. Maybe it has something to do with why the pier closed all those years ago. People were a lot more superstitious back then, so it probably has to do with that. I frowned, knowing his explanation was more than likely right, but something still bothered me. Yeah, that's true, but still, silver chains seems a little bit excessive, if you know what I mean. Isn't silver used to ward off evil or something like that? The smile returned to my father's face. What, you think a werewolf or something is living in here? Come on, Caleb. You came down here to smoke and drink when you were in high school. I came down here to do the same, and I'm pretty sure your grandfather did the same too. Out of all those times, did you feel something evil here? 'Cause I can tell you, I sure as hell haven't. I had to admit that I hadn't. Plenty of times that I'd come down here, the situation seemed straight out of a horror movie, yet nothing had happened. I never felt sinister eyes watching me, or heard growls or whispers, or smelt death and decay, or anything like that. My father turned and started walking back to where he'd left off. Just take off those chains for today. We'll worry about the other doors' chains some other day. Maybe we'll get even luckier and find something better in the storehouse. I nodded and turned my attention back to the stakes buried in the wood and holding the silver-linked barricade in place. I went back to the truck we'd come in and grabbed a pry bar. It didn't take much effort to pry off the 3 stakes on the left side of the doorway, causing the chains to fall loosely to the right side and enabling the door to be opened inward. Putting on my respirator, I took note of the door's high-quality craftsmanship and made a note in my notebook that the employers might want to keep the door for aesthetic taste. Slipping the pry bar into my tool belt, I gripped the doorknob and opened the door, a loud creaking accompanying the first sunlight that had entered the storehouse in over a century. I had always wondered why this building never had windows, but I guessed if you were keeping trading goods in there, you wouldn't want an easy way for thieves to enter. I entered the ancient structure and took a look around. To my surprise, the place was stacked high with old shipping crates and wooden barrels. The place had been abandoned with a ton of goods in it. I was also thankful for my respirator, and there were layers upon layers of dust everywhere, and who knew what kind of mold and mildew was growing there as well. It was quite the sight to see, and I felt a sort of childlike giddiness that I was the first person to explore this town staple since its doors had been chained shut 150 years ago. I closed the door behind me and slowly began to walk around the aisles made by the stacked cargo. I was still being very cautious, as not only the ancient cargo crates might fall apart at the slightest touch, but the floor was far more likely to collapse with all this added weight on it. Even though I knew I had a job to do, it was hard to contain the excitement at exploring the place. Every couple of steps I would stop and look at the crates and barrels, trying to use my headlamp to see if any of them contained labels of any sort. I was pretty sure there wasn't any food in here, even if I couldn't smell anything through my respirator, because rotten food would have reached the outside by then, and standing near the door, I had smelt nothing. My curiosity soon turned to boredom as I moved around the storehouse. I knew I wasn't allowed to open any of the crates or barrels, and it seemed like there was nothing in here but crates and barrels. The novelty was wearing off quickly, and I disappointingly went about doing the job I was sent here to do. I began to take measurements and looked for any major damage to the floor or structure we'd have to deal with first, before beginning the restoration process. My father's business had decent insurance, but so far, we'd only had to use it once for Walter. Father prided himself on safety and client satisfaction, and as much of a pain in the ass that was to uphold, it was worth it. I was bent over, looking at some potential water damage in a corner of the building, when a sudden creak made me stand up at attention. It hadn't sounded like a creak of wood settling, but more of something pressing weight on something wooden. Was I not alone in the storehouse? "Dad, are you in here?" I called out in the respirator. I know my voice was muffled, but if he was in the storehouse, he would have heard me easily enough. I got no response back. I waited for a couple more seconds before deciding it must have been wood naturally setting, and went back to inspecting the corner. Another creak rang out sharply through the storehouse, and this time I stood back up and tried to look around with my headlamp. The sun was just starting to rise outside, providing no light through the tiny openings in the wall, and leaving me to rely solely on my headlamp to see anything. "Dad, if that's you, this isn't funny. Just let me know if you're in here or not." I called out again, mostly anger in my voice, though I couldn't help but let out a tiny bit of fear as well. There was no possible way there could be anyone else here other than me and my father. A tiny voice suddenly spoke in the back of my mind. "There's a reason the people here chain the doors shut with silver." I shook that thought out of my head, but decided that I wasn't going to get spooked by my father. I reached into my tool belt and grabbed a pry bar. "Dad, I'm warning you. I got my crowbar out, and if you scare me, I can't guarantee I won't whack you in the face with it." I called out again, only to hear nothing but silence in return. I knew then I wasn't going to let Dad make a fool out of me, and slowly began to search the storehouse for him. I felt a little exhilarated stalking the aisles like a hunter in search of his prey. Dad rarely was ever the playful type, especially when it came to work, but I also knew he was an opportunist. And what better opportunity than this to scare your fully grown son and get a good laugh out of it? But I wasn't going to let him have his way in this maze of aged wood. I was going to teach him what a bad idea it was to try and scare a man who's got 5 inches and at least 25 more pounds of muscle on you. Of course, I wouldn't really hit him with a pry bar, but he didn't know that. As I got near another corner of the storehouse, I heard another creak. This one was much louder than before, but the sound made me freeze in place as I realized my mistake. The creak wasn't coming from the floor, like someone stepping on one of the old floorboards. The creak was coming from up above, and was probably one of the many support beams over my head, starting to give under pressure. I cursed my bad luck, and frantically began to scan the ceiling, trying to see which beam was in danger of falling down, and possibly bringing the whole ceiling down with it. Scanning the ceiling, the beam in question was easy to find, and what my headlamp illuminated made my blood run cold, and the breath catch in my throat. About 10 feet from me, laying across on one of the thicker horizontal beams, was a creature. A monster I couldn't dream up even in my worst nightmare. The body pale and shaped like a human, but must have been 7 feet long. Its skin was stretched tight across all the bones in its body, and black veins could be seen crisscrossing through it. Its feet were webbed, and the hands that topped each of its 2 long, Spidery arms looked more like two hands merged together. It was using its 2 palms and 10 fingers on each hand to keep itself steady on the beam. The head was the worst thing about it. Thin, long black hair hung down the sides of its face. It had no nose, with its eye sockets taking up about 2/3 of its face, and the rest of it being a long, thin jaw. Despite how large the sockets were, its eyes seemed to be just 2 small pinpricks of yellow light, shining in an abysmally dark cavern. Its mouth was open, and it had no teeth. A long, gray tongue, no shorter than 2 feet, hung from its mouth, but it wasn't an ordinary tongue. The end of the tongue opened up into another tiny mouth, this one filled with nothing but needle-like teeth. For a few seconds, we just stared at one another. This thing didn't move out of surprise of being caught, and I didn't move out of seeing some spawn from the pits of hell, not more than 10 feet away from me. At the ends of those tense seconds, the tongue twitched towards me slightly, and by instinct, I threw the pry bar at the beast with all of my might, turned on my heels, and ran as fast as I could away. A sickening crunch told me the pry bar had hit its mark, but I wasn't going to stop for anything. Unfortunately, in my panic, I tried to turn a corner too quick and ended up colliding into a stack of crates. These crates came crashing down on top of me, pinning me to the ground and cracking my respirator and destroying my headlamp. I laid there in the utter dark for a few moments, stunned, as a dull ache began to spread across my head and chest. A sound behind me made adrenaline course through my veins and clear my foggy mind in an instant. Behind me was the unmistakable sound of the floorboards creaking, mixed in with heavy breathing. Strength and purpose surged through me, and I burst forth from the fallen crates like a bat out of hell. Though I didn't have a light to guide my way, I generally remember where I had entered from, and I changed in that direction as fast as I could. Many times, I ended up slamming hard into the shipping barrels and boxes, but survival instinct had kicked in, and I recovered from those impacts instantly. I also think I was screaming, but I'm not completely sure. I made it to the door, for I could feel the outline of it in the doorway, but to my horror, there was no door handle on the inside. How could I have missed that? I began feeling around in vain, trying to find some opening I could fit my hand and pull the thing open. When I found nothing, I tried pushing the door, but it wouldn't move an inch. From the darkness behind me, I heard rapid squeaking of the floorboards as the thing began to run at me from the darkness. It must have known I was at the door and had no plans on letting me escape. All of a sudden, the door was pushed inward, knocking me on my butt. Light flooded inward and I could see the silhouette of my father standing in the doorway. "What the hell is going on in here?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I lunged for the open air, collapsing onto the pier in the light of the morning sun, and thanking God I made it out of there alive. My father knelt by my side, and I guess I was more banged up than I thought, because Dad went pale at the sight of me. "Oh my God, we have to get you to a hospital, now," he cried, wrapping one of my arms around his shoulder and lifting me from the ground. I didn't mind, and I was just thankful to be in light again. However, as he placed me in the passenger side of the truck, and the world started fading fast as my eyes grew heavy, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that sent abject horror through my soul. The door to the storehouse was wide open. Before I could muster the strength to tell my father to close the door, I lost consciousness. I awoke in the hospital later. Apparently, I had a pretty nasty concussion and head wound from one of the old boxes falling on it. When I tried to tell the doctors, my father, anyone who would listen about the creature in the storehouse, I was told a head injury like the one I got could explain why I saw a monster in the storehouse. But I saw it before I was injured, and I was scared to go home, and my fears were solidified when, later that afternoon, Walter and Steve dropped by to drop off the broken respirator and pry bar they'd retrieved from the storehouse. They said they didn't find any monsters in there, but my respirator had been crushed completely, like someone stomped on it, and my pry bar had this black, sticky, vicious substance on one end, and they had no clue as to what it could be. I quit my father's business and moved downstate 2 weeks after the incident. On the surface, I told my father that I was looking to expand my own horizons, and while I loved him, I needed a fresh change of pace. In truth, it was because I was afraid to be in my own hometown with that thing free. I don't know how old wood and chains managed to keep it locked in there for over 100 years, but it had worked, and now that it was out, I feared what it would do with its newfound freedom. I'm working for another contracting company about 70 miles south. It's not as good as my job with my dad's company, but I get by. I occasionally check in with my family, and everything seems to be going great. They finished remodeling the storehouse into a restaurant in the fall, and it's a pretty popular place. Life is looking up for the town. Well, that wasn't until the winter. Throughout the times I called during the summer and fall, I found out from my conversations with Dad that some of his fisherman friends had been complaining. It seemed that in the later summer and fall, that all the fish were disappearing from the river, and nobody had a clue why. When I called in December, my decision to get as far away from that river as I could get was reaffirmed. It seems like all the fish and 3 local fishermen were making up the disappeared list. Checking online recently, that number of missing men has only tripled since then, with a mother and her baby added in too. We should have brought that building down on the beast's head when we had the chance. When I was younger, I used to have what some people might have referred to as sleeping problems. For the most part, I was a relatively well-behaved child. I got good grades, obeyed my parents, and finished all my chores. I was never able to turn off the boundless energy that seemed to power my body, even when lying stationary in my bed. There was just something so exciting about how the thin crescent of the glowing moon peeked in through the half-drawn curtains, like an opening eye. There was always more to do and see at night, and I wanted to map out every inch of the darkness. I have no idea how my poor parents coped. Children are always a handful at that age, but I'm surprised that I didn't drive the 2 of them completely insane. No matter how many times they put me to bed, they would always wake up to a tugging on the bed covers and find me standing there. In the mornings, they were both barely conscious. My mother's foundation would be smeared across her face in an attempt to conceal the dark bags, as big as gunny sacks that hung under her eyelids, while my father's face dropped further into a cereal bowl, his half undone tie already soaking in milk. All the while, I would remain as chipper and alert as ever, as if I'd had a full 8 hours of sleep, bemused at the strange behavior of my parents. They tried everything: bargaining, punishment, and even promising me treats and toys if I just slept one full night, but nothing seemed to work. Both were at their wits' end. But neither of them refused to give in. They removed anything electronic from my room. The only source of light that permeated my room was the glow of the illuminated upstairs through the crack in my bedroom door, and the hanging moon outside my bedroom window. An armchair was positioned outside my door, and my parents would take regular shifts every night, sitting in it to make sure that I didn't get out. In the end, I was effectively trapped in my room. My body felt like it would explode with all the pent-up energy. I needed to move. It was on just such a night where I was mapping out the cracks that lined my ceiling. 38 in total. I shifted around, my restless limbs crinkling the sheets which felt like lead on top of me. A soft snore caught my ears. I craned my neck into the narrowed view of the door. My dad, who had been assigned to my watch this night, was slumped over to the side of the chair, mouth open. A hurricane would have torn through the house, and he would have probably slept right through it. My heart pounded with equal parts fear and excitement as I swung a cautious leg over the edge of my bed. I cringed on the low creak of the floorboards as I stepped out. A sudden rustle from outside my heart completely stopped altogether. I waited for the lights to flick on and my father's angry voice to blare in. After a few seconds frozen in fear, I forced myself to look outside once more. My attentions were drawn to the shuddering branches of one tree that stood amongst the bristling tips of the forest clearing. Even though it was pitch black out there, I swore that it hadn't been there during the day. It was only when it stood up that I realized that it wasn't a tree at all. I stared, mouth open, as the shapeless form unfurled into a gigantic humanoid figure, who arched its bony arms into the twinkling light of the distant stars. Its elongated fingers extended just far enough to graze the pale underbelly of the moon. Its eyes fluttered open, It had no pupils or irises, just pure, mesmerizing white whose brightness rivaled the moon above. I was so transfixed by the sight that I didn't notice the shape was getting bigger, its luminous eyes expanding until I was almost blinded. It glided silently through the night on stilt-like limbs, the trees parting around each step of its immense legs. My heart vaulted into my mouth as it dawned on me. It had seen me. It was coming. As I was about to make a run for it, a sharp bang sent me flailing backwards. It stood right outside my window, staring in at me. My bedroom was on the second floor, yet it had to crane its neck to peer through. It had to be at least 20 feet tall, but it lacked the mass one would associate with a being of that size. It was morbidly thin, almost fleshless, its bare ribcage glinting out in the night like a corpse in the desert, long picked clean by ravenous carrion. The rest of its body was shrouded in shadow, apart from the unnatural light of its eyes that pulled in like twin spotlights. Any screams for help I could have let out were sealed inside my throat. I couldn't even breathe. Somehow, the thing's very presence seemed to suck my very voice out of my body. After a few minutes of glowering in, motionless, it raised a massive clawed hand. Its silvery skin of its sinuous arm shimmered up from the faint light. It looked metallic, resembling a metal coil, yet its movements were too fluid and organic to be anything mechanical. Then, it dragged the serrated tips of its fingers down the glass at a nails-on chalkboard pitch. I dove into my bed and buried myself under the blankets, desperate to escape its unremitting stare, abiding by the old, "it can't see you if you can't see it" childhood logic. But the hideous sound echoed through my ears, a permanent reminder of its presence. The scratches seemed to grow louder by the second, as if at any moment it would break through the glass and drag me out of my bed into the inky black beyond, never to be seen again. My body, half curled into the fetal position, was shaking so badly that my brain could barely form a coherent thought. All I wanted was for whatever it was to disappear, for this whole thing to end. Someone out there must have heard my desperate pleas. Just then, the trailing headlights of a car rushed down the road. The creature recoiled at the sight, distracted from its tormenting of me. It scratched at its face with a muffled howl as the light burnt it. Just before it passed our house, it reverted onto all fours and raced away like a rabid greyhound into the safety of the nearby woods. I lay frozen underneath the cocooning bedcloths, too afraid to even flinch in case my slightest movement would draw the creature back again. Somehow, in my all-consuming terror, I managed to find the respite of sleep. It was the first entire night that I'd stayed in my own bed, even as the smiling sun warmed the glass. I still refused to dip even a toe out of my bed. It was only after summoning every remaining ounce of courage in my body and the groaning of my stomach that I managed to creep down the stairs. As I made my way to the kitchen to fetch myself a bowl of cereal, I tried to dismiss the whole thing as just a particularly vivid sleep paralysis experience, but those glowing eyes seemed to be burnt into my mind. Every time I blinked, I saw them. My parents were already down there. Although both had slept better than they had in a long time, their faces were pale and drawn, exchanging fearful, frantic whispers that seized the moment they realized I was standing in the doorway. I froze, thinking I was in trouble. Mom, her eyes reddened and puffy, rose from the table and hugged me hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Dad had to pry her hands away from my sides before I suffocated completely. Turns out that I was the lucky one. Just a few houses down from ours, on that very same night, an 8-year-old girl by the name of Janice had vanished. I'd attended a few of her prior birthday parties, along with the other neighborhood kids. Her mother had come into her room after hearing her cry out in the middle of the night. To comfort her from the nightmare she'd assumed she'd been having, when she'd switched on the lights, she'd found her daughter's bed empty. Once the police had been called, they had scoured every inch of the house and the surrounding acres, but had found no trace of Janice. They never did. The only soluble clue to her disappearance had been the window that her mother had left open the night before. The white strawberry patterned curtains still flapped in the morning breeze. In hindsight, I should have just paid my rent every month. When I first got the phone call stating it was from a lawyer, every muscle in my body tensed up. I was broke, living alone, and barely making ends meet. There was no way I would have enough for anything to pay anyone, but I didn't have to. An aunt I did not know existed had passed away and left me her apartment. She had considered reaching out to me, but had lost her mind to dementia before she could, and then, well, passed away at the hospice she was living in. I was confused at first, but quick identity checks and whatnot later, the apartment was signed over. Apparently, since she was in hospice, no one had used the apartment in a long time. Living rent-free meant I could afford to sleep at night and not worry about going homeless or hungry if I missed a night of work or two. I was told it was furnished, and maybe if I had come to check the apartment out before moving here, I would have saved myself the trouble. I packed all my belongings in 2 boxes and a backpack and drove myself to the apartment. The building looked like it was pretty old, maybe early mid 20th century, not too much older than that. It had red brick walls, which I had romanticized for a long time, so at least it made me feel good. For a few minutes there, apparently, that's how it lures you in. The first strange thing happened when entering the apartment. I met my old neighbors from my small town. A young couple as they were carrying their groceries in. We exchanged pleasantries, and I asked them what they were doing here. We were in another country. He just smiled and said that things happened and led them there and smiled. There was something about their smile, like they knew something you didn't that made them unnerving. So I left the conversation at that. We weren't super close even back in the day. Anyway, the apartment has a concierge/security desk, so that was good. The guy at the concierge looked exactly like what I expected the concierge guy to look like. He was a big, balding man in his 40s, with a strange snorting laugh. I explained where I needed to go. I was told to leave my box of stuff there for him to carry it up at the freight elevator when he started his rounds. I told him I could handle it, but he looked at me sternly and yelled, "No stuff in people elevator." I was so taken aback by his sudden change in tone that I left the box by his desk and walked with just my backpack. I was told to climb the stairs to the 2nd floor and take the elevator there. My old neighbors were waiting for me to finish having this conversation, still smiling, still staring at me, occasionally whispering things between themselves. As soon as I turned away from the concierge to walk down the hallway, they started walking, a few steps in front of me. This was strange, but I was tired, so I just wanted to get to my aunt's apartment, which was on the 6th floor. Well, I guess it's mine now. I started climbing the stairs with them a few steps ahead of me. Whenever they reached a ledge, they stopped, simultaneously turned around and smiled at me, almost as if to make sure I was still there. Then they continued walking, as if I didn't exist. I even tried asking them some questions in our native language, but they didn't answer, even as they spoke the language between themselves. At that moment, it seemed like the weirdest thing. Oh boy, was it tame compared to what happened next. It felt like we climbed about 10 stories worth of stairs, just to get to the 2nd floor, and I was basically cursing my weird absent aunt for leaving me this weird apartment, but still determined to make the best of it. After the stairs, we had to walk the length of a long hallway to reach the elevators. The hallway had a pretty blue and gold carpet, which made it look very rich, almost regal. When we reached the elevators, they pressed the elevator button first. There were 2 elevators, and from the outside, they looked like old-timey elevators. And when the door opened, I was right. The door in front of them opened, and they just stepped to the side, still smiling the unnerving smile. I went ahead and got in. Well, suit yourself. They were behaving like creeps anyway. As the door was closing, the lady from the couple said, "I'd pick her up if I were you." Before I could find out what she meant, the doors closed and the elevator started moving up. The lights flickered for a second, and I immediately felt my stomach drop. I took a step back and knew what she meant. There in the elevator was a doll, a creepy, old-timey girl doll with a porcelain face and its hands outstretched to me. I picked it up without thinking, and the moment I picked it up, I swear to God, I felt it curl up to me like a baby. It rested its head on my chest for a few seconds. I could feel it breathe. My heart was about to leap out of my chest when the elevator slowed to a stop. In floor 4, a man who looked too old to be true stood outside. looked at me with my fear-ridden face holding the doll, and politely waved his hand for me to go ahead, even as my tears were pleading for someone to get in with me, to tell me what to do. That's a bad time, no? The doors closed and the elevator started with a ding again. By now, the doll's hands were moving, slowly as it inched toward my neck. I wished for the elevator to just drop me down to my death. I didn't think that even being crushed to death seemed better. I didn't want to be choked to death by a doll in an elevator, in a building that I had never been in. I closed my eyes and prayed, even when I hadn't prayed in years. I felt its cold, doll hands on my neck, and my warm tears rush over them. I felt the elevator slow to a stop. I felt the lights flicker for a second as my heart stopped beating. When I opened my eyes, the doll had disappeared. The elevator doors opened and here I was, on floor 6. I quickly got out and fell to the floor outside the elevator. I didn't know what to think. What the hell was that? Had I just made it up in my mind? Have I lost my mind? Just as the elevator doors were closing, I saw in the reflection in the metal inside of the elevator, the doll, peacefully pretending to sleep. I swear to God it happened. This isn't some adult just reliving their childhood Chucky nightmares. I scrambled to my feet. I'll have to figure out what's going on. I wanted answers and I wanted out. The thought of going back on the elevator sent shivers down my spine, so I conceded to just going to my aunt's apartment, 632. I looked for the numbers and started walking in the direction of the apartment. As if out of nowhere, I heard a giggle and turned around to see my old neighbors walking ahead in the hallway. I called out to them. They turned around and smiled but said nothing. Immediately, I felt like asking them anything was a bad idea. I told them to have a good day and went ahead to my apartment door. 2 more strange things have happened since then. My box of stuff was in the center of the living room of the house. The only thing is, everything in the house was coated with dust. When I walked in, I left footprints in the dust. There were, however, no other footprints. How did the box get in? Who dropped it off? How did they get in? Why did they not leave footprints? I had so many questions. I collapsed on the floor, bawling my eyes out from the fear and the stress. When I collected myself, I decided that either I was going to have to brave up and make this work, or move out and live in the streets for a while, until I found another place. I picked option 1. I cleaned the house like my life depended on it. Even though the kitchen was unused, everything worked. I had brought along my old groceries, which meant I could eat. After getting my food, I opened my phone and was surprised by the notifications. The little Wi-Fi symbol on my phone had lit up and was connected to Spiderweb. Creative, isn't it? I didn't create it. Free Wi-Fi was still free Wi-Fi, so I took what I could get. I immediately looked up the apartment and found no strange stuff directly related to the apartment. Something made me look up the names of the neighbors. Well, that was certainly a strange thing, because according to the news article, they passed away in a fire. The house was burnt to the ground. They couldn't recover any remains. I can't link the article without giving away exactly where I'm from, so forgive me for not doing so. When I woke up the next morning, I realized I had slept on my laptop, again. Any feelings of fear had been replaced by determination to make it work. I had spent long enough lurking on this subreddit since then to realize, perhaps there may be rules to living in this apartment. I just have to find them and follow them, and trust my gut, and pray that my aunt wanted the best for me, and will look out for me, if I need her to. I couldn't find any paper or document within the apartment which had the rules, and I couldn't find anything online. It took me 2 days, and a need to get to work on the Tuesday, after the long weekend, that finally brought me to take the elevator again, but I was able to ride it without incident when I was getting to work. It was around 5:30 in the morning and the concierge guy was sleeping. I didn't feel like it was right to wake him. By the time I had returned, it was 10:30 p.m. The apartment was actually quite normal at nights, and for some reason, I felt safer when it was dark outside anyway. Maybe I could get used to living in this strange apartment. Okay, so I moved out of my last home 11 months ago. We, my sister, mother, and I, had lived in that house for around 6 years, give or take. I didn't start thinking it was haunted until my sister's friend came over for a sleepover. We were being stupid and decided to download a ghost hunting app because we had heard noises coming from downstairs. This was concerning because at this point in time, our aunt, whose house we were living in, never left her room. She had her own bathroom, mini fridge, and microwave in there. She had the master bedroom. It had double doors and was the first thing you would notice coming up the stairs. Those doors would be heard throughout the house whenever she would leave and come home. I promise this information is important. Her room was also technically soundproof, so you would never be able to tell if she was home unless you tried to open the door. She would usually lock it when she was home, and then leave it unlocked when she left. Anyway, we downloaded the app and left our room. I was scared because at the time, I believed in ghosts more than ever. Before anything could even happen, I decided to stay in our room and watch YouTube until they came back. Every once in a while I would hear them slightly freak out, and I would just start shaking more. At one point my sister and her friend are running up the stairs practically screaming. That caused me to start screaming and freak them out even more. The app would detect something moving and say that it was a ghost. Thinking back on it, that was absolute bullcrap because when I agreed to join them, I got freaked out and ran up the stairs. The app went crazy saying there was a ghost, but it was just me. Fast forward to the last 2 years of living there. I have matured, and my sister has too. My sister stopped believing in ghosts, but I didn't. The last 2 years of living there, I was getting home from school before anyone else. My aunt had also come out of her hibernating stage and got a boyfriend. He was living with us now, and he seemed pretty chill. He had also earned a badge of respect on my part considering he had helped me out when I cut open my knee, and then later had to get stitches. My aunt and her boyfriend were coming in and out of the house more frequently, and we would always hear their door open and close whenever they would come home and when they would leave. The house wasn't big, but just had a ton of open space, and it was usually kept spotless. Voices would echo especially from downstairs to upstairs. The downstairs was pretty empty, and usually really cold, but I never minded. The downstairs was very open, and we could see it all from the stairs. Whenever I would come home from school, I would walk into the kitchen, place down my bag on the chair next to me, and scroll on my phone. And without a doubt, I would hear my aunt's bedroom door open and then close. Now this didn't happen right as I would walk in. It would happen 20 to 30 minutes of me sitting there. The first time I heard it, I expected my aunt's boyfriend to come downstairs, but he never did. I waited 5 minutes to see if I heard the doors open again. I thought he was going to do some laundry, but I didn't hear the laundry machine either. I was completely freaked out, but ended up brushing it off 10 minutes later. This would always happen, and I would always turn my head towards the stairs expecting to see my aunt or my aunt's boyfriend, who we started to call Uncle, come down the stairs. Sometimes he would, and we would exchange a quick hey and move on with our day. The room my sister and I had been sharing used to be our older cousin's room. He moved out when our other uncle, our cousin's dad, took him back to Mexico. Again, this is important information. After a month or so after we moved out, we were all settled into our new apartment. I would always joke around, and whenever I heard a noise I would gasp and yell out, "A ghost!" My mom would roll her eyes, and my sister would call me an idiot. We were having dinner and our mother's boyfriend was there with us. We were talking about ghosts and creepy things that used to happen at our old house. Out of nowhere my mom says, "I guess I should tell you, since it's pointless and we don't live there anymore." I look at her and ask, "What do you mean?" "You remember how your cousin used to sleep in the room you girls stayed in, right?" "Yeah." "Well, when he slept there, he used to keep his door open because he was scared of the dark and could run to your aunt's room if he got too scared." "Okay," I said hesitantly, and looked at my sister, who seemed just as confused. On multiple occasions, he would wake up and see a woman in white standing in the hallway staring at him. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, your tia used to tell me how she thought your cousin was a medium or something, because he would always see spirits." At this point, my mouth is hanging open, and I'm in shock. "Wait, you saw this woman right where I used to tell you I heard noises?" "Yep." I had told my mother while living there that I would hear my aunt's door open and close. She would tell me it was nothing, or that it was probably from me coming home and the air doing something. Hearing this new information, I started to tear up. I was always told by my mother that ghosts weren't real, and that the house wasn't haunted. My mother proceeded to tell me that my cousin described the woman to be dressed in a long white nightgown and looked completely pale. I couldn't believe it, and I was officially scared of that house. I haven't been back there since I moved, and I don't plan on going back. But hopefully I will go back and try to actually investigate what happened there once and for all. I'm not a good person. I've done bad things. I've hurt people to get ahead. I've ruined people's careers just to advance mine. My children don't speak to me because of how abusive I was with them growing up. All 3 of my marriages ended in divorce due to my infidelities. Call me an atheist, an agnostic, or whatever you want, but I've never believed in a god or even a devil. I'm very aware of myself, and no matter how much pain I've caused other people, admittedly, sometimes even purposely to entertain myself, no one deserves what I went through. I'm currently lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines and IVs. I don't remember how I initially got here, but there was apparently an attempt on my life. The last thing I remember is working in my home office, then blackout. The nurses said I had been shot in the back of the head and was lucky to be alive. I will have permanent brain damage for the rest of my life, but luckily, I'm alive. The police informed me the would-be assassin has been caught and confessed to what he did. Apparently, it was a former employee in my company. I'd never met him before, but he was part of a department that I deemed obsolete and laid off the entire department. The plus side was, I was able to pay off my Corvette years early thanks to the saving of that particular closure. Apparently, one of them didn't see any silver linings to the layoffs. After I blacked out, I woke in the hospital with medical personnel filling a small room. I was standing at the far end of the room, perplexed by my sudden awakened state, as well as my unfamiliar surroundings. The medical staff were doing all they could to save someone's life. It was almost out of a movie or TV show. Although I had just woken up, no grogginess or fatigue, which was very strange. After a few seconds of trying to gather myself, I decided I needed answers. "Hey," I yelled abruptly to get someone's attention. "Why have I been brought here?" They ignored me and continued their work. Now, I know I'm not exactly the nicest guy in the world, but they could have taken 2 seconds to acknowledge me. I became impatient. "Hey, Doc," I exclaimed as I grabbed his shoulder. I couldn't move him. He was solid. I don't mean solid like he was tough to move. I couldn't move him at all. I couldn't even move his scrubs. I felt every ripple of his shirt as my palm pressed it. It was almost like it was made of a plastic or metal. I pressed again. Nothing. I pressed harder. He didn't budge. Something was clearly not right. I tried getting the attention of everyone else. I yelled at them and pushed them. I even tried slapping one of the doctors on the back of the head. I felt my hand hit, but it's as if he was wearing a helmet. Not one strand of hair budged. What the hell is going on here? Somebody answer me. I screamed, feeling a bit more panicked. As they continued their work, I looked down at the patient they were hastily trying to save. It was me. I was watching these people try to save my life. My eyes widened out of fright at the realization of me having some kind of an out-of-body experience. I stood, frozen as I watched them. I was a complete deer in headlights. After a couple of minutes, I began pacing the room nervously as they continued their work. I heard a voice coming from the doorway. "Hello?" The whispered voice said softly. I nervously looked towards the direction of the almost seductive sounding voice. It was a nurse. She could see me. She was beautiful. She smiled at me, giving me almost a sense of relief and warmth. I shakily replied. "Hi," I said, hoping she would volunteer to clear up my confusion. "Come with me," she said with a grin, motioning for me to follow her with her hand while walking away. I did just that. I took one more glance over my shoulder at my body and began walking out the door. As I exited the room, I looked to my right in the direction she had walked. She had already made it a good 20 feet ahead of me. I began walking quickly to keep up. "Ma'am, slow down," I beckoned. "You're walking too fast. I can't keep..." The hallway was getting noticeably darker as I walked. I looked behind me. The ER room I came from was gone. The doorway was now just a wall. No yells from the doctors and nurses. It was dead silent. The dark hallway seemed to go on without end. I looked in front of me again. "Hello? Nurse, where are you?" I yelled as loud as I could. "This way, hun." Her seemingly disembodied voice said from the darkness. I walked and walked for several minutes. Blank, empty hospital walls were all that greeted me as I made my way further into the darkness. No more doors, no pictures, no people. The hallway became darker and darker with every step. Almost there now, the nurse said from the blackness. I stopped right there. By now, my concern had turned to annoyance. Alright, I'm not going any further. Nurse, come back here and tell me what's happening, and then I'll come with you, I said sternly. Silence. Hello? Nurse? If this is a game, I'm really not... I was stopped by my realization that the hospital walls were now gone. The black void the nurse had walked into was now surrounding me. The darkness seemingly went on for eternity in all directions. I stood confused. Even more confusing was the fact that, while I was completely surrounded by darkness, I could see myself clearly. My body was lit up as if I was in daylight, yet there was just nothingness around me. Could this be a sort of purgatory? I began to hear voices coming from the darkness. At first I could only hear murmurs. I couldn't tell if they were mumbling or just in the distance since I couldn't see anything around me. They became louder and more numerous. Many voices were now yelling. I could start to hear what they were saying. You're scum. You're getting what you deserve. You'll pay for what you did to me now. I hate you. You're evil. Finally, you're going to feel the pain you caused me. I vividly remember some of the terrifying voices say from the darkness. I tried to cover my ears as the voices became louder and louder, but it didn't help. I dropped to my knees and yelled for them to stop. What do you want? Where are you? Go away, I frantically yelled. I tried to act tough and add a sternness to my orders, but my voice cracked with every demand. I ducked my head while continuing to hold my ears. The voices became louder as they continued to berate me. I felt an impact in my chest. I fell on my back and began clutching my ribs. As I looked up at who or what hit me, I saw a man standing in front of me. The hatred in his eyes is something I cannot describe, nor wish to. He stood over me with his fist clenched. The voices were beginning to die down. People were starting to gather around me. One by one, they seemingly appeared from the blackness, all with similar looks of hatred on their faces. The voices stopped. There were dozens upon dozens of people surrounding me, standing there with terrifying glares. It was now eerily silent. No one was talking. I nervously panned the crowd of people around me. I put up my hands as I began to beg them to leave me alone. Who? Before I could start my play, they began to attack me, all of them at once. They were kicking, punching, and scratching at me. Their rants and yelling started up again, this time even angrier and meaner than before. Stop, go away, help! I frantically screamed as they continued to claw and beat me. I've been waiting a long time to do this, rich man. I heard one of them say as he kicked me in the head. A woman who was clawing at my side with her nails taunted me as well. I'm going to tear you apart. You deserve far worse than this. I felt the raking of her claws on my torso intensely, yet when I looked at my skin, no marks, no scratches or blood. It's as if nothing happened, but the pain was there. The group continued their assault on me as I lay in a fetal position trying to block as many of the blows as I could. This was a pain I've never felt before. The mental pain was equally strong. After what felt like an eternity, the people stopped their kicks and clawing and began tearing my clothes from my body. They were so violent about it, bending my limbs in ways that would normally break them just to get the clothes off me, but nothing was broken. Feeling the pain of limbs being stretched and bent without anything tearing or breaking is indescribable. The assaults continued as I lay there on the ground, desperately attempting to plead to my attackers and blocking their strikes. It was here that I don't know why I did what I did, but I began yelling for help from an unlikely source. God, please help me. God, please help. I yelled into the air as I felt another blunt kick to my ribs. God is not here. One of them yelled. He's abandoned you. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could. I continued my pleas to a God I've never believed in my entire life. This seemed to anger these people the more I continued. You're evil. No one will save you. I hate you. We all hate you. God hates you. Another man said while desperately trying to get his punches in among the crowd. Just as he landed his successful strike, they stopped. They just stopped and stared at me. No one uttered a single word. They stared at me with a look of repulsion, as if I wasn't worth the beatings anymore. Without a single word spoken, they began walking away. There was a deafening silence as they walked back into the darkness. I lay there, naked, beaten, and alone. No bruises, no scratches, no blood. Just the immense pain from my seemingly unending attack. I began crying as I lay beaten physically and emotionally. I began to realize where I was. This was hell. Not the fiery pit of lava and rock I always imagined it would look like. It's dark and cold. I lay there for several more minutes until I felt a presence. I couldn't see anything, but there was something there, and I could feel its hatred in the stale air. This hatred, though, was far deeper. A groaned whisper came from the black void around me. It was in another language, but the message was received. The tone of the voice terrified me as I knew its intent was malevolent. As I tried looking around for where this voice came from, I felt an excruciatingly painful grasp on my ankle. If my bones could break, they would have been crushed to powder. Something was dragging me, violently. It was dragging me so fast. My naked, beaten body was sliding across the bare ground. The burning pain on my skin as the ground scraped underneath me was unimaginable. After, I don't know how long, I stopped. After I hugged my torso in pain for a few seconds, I began to look around. The black void was still around me, but there were people. I panicked at the thought the attackers had returned. The panic turned to confusion as I realized they weren't attacking me. They weren't even looking at me. They were all just wandering around aimlessly and naked, like me. I stood up and slowly walked towards one of them. "Who are you? Where are we?" I asked. He turned his head slowly to look at me. He had a look of confusion on his face as if he was confused as to why I was speaking to him. He continued shuffling on, almost zombie-like. Everyone around me was doing the same, aimlessly wandering. There were hundreds, maybe thousands if I could see further into the void. I was in hell. This is going to be my new eternity. I fell to the ground in tears. Some people turned to look at me, but all with a blank expression. As I sobbed uncontrollably on the ground, I felt the presence return, paired with a growling sound. From above us, a body came hurtling to the ground, hitting with a deep thud. The person yelped in pain as they impacted. This caught the attention of the others, who then cowered in fear. They began crying while holding their arms up in the air, as if to block something. I then witnessed something truly horrifying. One of the crying people just lifted off the ground violently and disappeared into the black darkness above, paired with another growling sound. The others let out a sigh of relief and began their slow shuffling. The person who had fallen was sobbing hysterically on the ground. I ran to try and help. As soon as I touched her, she screamed loudly, swatting my hands from her. She got up and ran. I watched her run quickly until she disappeared into the eternal darkness. I don't know how much time had passed after that. I started walking around almost as aimlessly as the others, but all directions were just more darkness. Some people glanced at me. One man gave me a glare as if me simply being there irritated him. No. The presence was back. I felt it. The evil that coursed through me was intense as another body dropped from the emptiness. Another thud was heard, paired with a scream of pain. The others once again put their hands up in fear. An intense pain went through my entire body as some invisible force was crushing my body. It lifted me into the air. It was my turn for whatever tortures lie ahead. I could see the scared people below me become smaller as I was lifted higher and higher. The grip around my body was so tight and so painful. I began crying in defeat when, from the emptiness in front of me, I heard a voice. "Is he going to be okay?" A familiar voice said. It was my daughter. What is she doing here? I yelled to her. I screamed for help. "Stephanie, help me." My voice started to shrivel as the immense pain continued through the entirety of my body. "I love you, Steph. I love you so much." I continued as I sobbed. I began to feel tired, exhausted. I don't know how to explain it, but I passed out. I awoke to more voices around me. I felt a sense of panic as I opened my eyes. My body was too weak to move. I looked up in fright. It was Stephanie, and she was smiling at me. Dad, can you hear me? She said quietly. I nodded with a frightened look. Dad, you're going to be okay. You were shot, but the doctors were able to remove the bullet. They saved you, she said in a much needed, loving tone. It took a full day before I could speak coherently. The bullet had lodged itself in my skull just enough to put pressure on my brain. If the doctors would have made one screw up, I would have died. I've been in this hospital for 4 days now. Every day I think about what happened to me. Was it truly hell? Did I get a glimpse into an eternal damnation that awaits me? Or could the pressure on my brain have caused a hallucination? Whatever the explanation is, the horror I experienced was truly terrifying. The short time I was there was so scarring. I can't imagine an eternity of the same pain. They say I flatlined for a full minute, if all of that. Everything that I saw and felt could happen in just 1 minute. I'm truly terrified of what's in store for me when I die again.